Hello and welcome back to Thecrimereel. Today we shall be visiting the Midlands in the United Kingdom to look at the life of Barry Williams. In 1941, a 17-year-old woman by the name of Hilda Clapham married her 23-year-old fiancé Horace Williams in Birmingham, UK. 3 years later, in September 1944, Hilda gave birth to their first child, a boy who they named Barry. When Barry was just over a year old, he became a big brother to Anton. Hilda and Horace owned and ran a metal polishing business in Birmingham and lived in an area just outside of the city. What followed appeared to be a normal childhood for the boys. They were brought up in a modest semi-detached house in Andrew Road, which was located on a nice housing estate in West Bromwich. Anton got married in 1970 at the age of 25 and went on to have one child. Meanwhile, Barry was single and remained living with his parents, who described him as a quiet boy. He worked nearby as a foundry worker, someone who is predominantly responsible for melting and pouring metals. Barry developed an interest in guns and held a valid UK firearms certificate. That allowed him to legally possess a single semi-automatic weapon. Access by the UK general public to firearms is now subject to some of the strictest control measures in the world. However, during the 1970s, this was not the case. Barry used his gun licence to visit an approved gun club for target shooting. He was remembered as a quiet, strange character who would never stop and socialise with other club members. He soon started to gain a reputation for his unusual behaviour. It is reported that he ignored the club safety rules and acted more like a cop in a television series than someone who wanted to learn the art of shooting. This behaviour even earned him the nickname of the Cowboy. Barry also requested that wigs be added to moving targets to make them more lifelike, and then, when it was subsequently discovered that he was stealing bullets, he was banned from the club. Also living in Andrew Road, in the house next door to the Williams, was the Burkitt family. George, a self-employed builder, together with his wife Iris and their 20-year-old son Philip, along with their daughter Jill, who was 17. Over a period of years, Barry had become increasingly confrontational with the Burkitt family. He frequently complained about the noise they were making when they were working on their car or playing music, even the volume at which they watched the television. There had been several arguments, and on one occasion Barry started ferociously banging on the front door to complain about the music. According to a friend of the family, this really wasn't particularly loud. In October 1978, during an argument with Philip Burkitt, it is reported that Barry claimed, "I'm going to exterminate you." Thursday, 26th of October 1978 started out as an ordinary day for the residents of Andrew Road in Birmingham. Father and son, George and Philip Burkitt, were outside their house completing some work on their Triumph Spitfire. Iris was inside with Jill, who was busy completing her homework for her nursery nurse training. Barry had returned from work and was sitting in his parents' kitchen cleaning his guns. He started to become increasingly aggravated at what he perceived to be an unreasonable amount of noise coming from his neighbours. He pulled out one of the two guns that he was carrying and shot George Burkitt in the head. As George lay dying on the floor, Barry shot him again, hitting him in the chest and side. George's son Philip was terrified. He tried to run back into the house, but Barry shot him through the heart. He died instantly. Barry then went into the house where he shot and killed Iris before firing 6 further shots into 17-year-old Jill. She was hit in the chest, back and leg, but somehow survived despite these horrific injuries. Another neighbour, Judith Chambers, who was a cousin of Iris Burkitt, opened her door to see what was happening. She thought she could hear a car backfiring and went to see if someone needed help. Barry turned the gun onto Judith, shooting her twice, once in the chest and once in the shoulder. He also shot her husband Joe, but miraculously they both survived. Just 5 minutes later, with 3 people dead and 3 more seriously injured, Barry jumped into his green Ford Capri. He sped off, continuing to shoot indiscriminately as he drove. On the next street in Stanhurst Way, he shot at a woman and 2 young boys who were playing football as he raced past. Luckily, he missed them all. As he continued driving through the town of Wednesbury, he shot through the windows of several buildings. A 9-year-old girl sustained cuts from flying glass, but luckily escaped more serious injury. Barry then headed towards Stockington, near Nuneaton, where he arrived at a petrol station, which was owned by 56-year-old Michel de Maria and his 47-year-old wife Elisabetta. He opened fire on them through the kiosk window and killed them both before once again driving off. A massive manhunt was soon underway. The next morning, on October 27th, 1978, police caught up with Barry and a high-speed chase through Buxton in Derbyshire followed. For over 30 miles, police were in pursuit of Barry before he eventually crashed his car. Once cornered, Barry pulled a gun on the officers and tried to hijack one of the police cars. Unarmed police officers managed to overpower him, and he was arrested on Main Street, Buxton, in front of a queue of people waiting to watch Grease at the cinema. A subsequent search of his car revealed that he had with him nearly 150 9mm rounds, nearly 800 .22 rounds, and several homemade bombs. He was charged with 5 counts of murder, with 2 counts of attempted murder being ordered to stay on file. It is reported that during the police interviews, he was quoted as saying, "You would have shot the Burkitts if you'd been me. They weren't human beings, they were things. They wouldn't shut up, so I shut them up. They were driving me mad, so I shot them. I shot everything that moved." At Stafford Crown Court in March 1979, Barry pleaded not guilty to murder, instead pleading guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. After psychiatrists gave evidence that he had an active paranoid psychosis, this plea was accepted by the prosecution, and the judge, Mr. Justice Stephen Brown, ordered that Barry was held indefinitely. He was sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric hospital, from which he could only be released by order of the Secretary of State. In 1994, 15 years after his crimes and apprehension, the then Home Secretary, Michael Howard, agreed to Barry's release from Broadmoor. Despite the overwhelming concerns of those connected to Barry's 1978 crime spree, his release was authorised on medical evidence that he was no longer deemed a danger to the public. Due to the adverse publicity, when he was released, he changed his name to Harry Street and was shockingly allowed to live in a bail hostel just 6 miles from Andrew Road and a short distance from where Jill Burkitt was now living. Barry's father and brother had both died while he was in prison. and it would appear at this point that Barry wanted to move forward and live in a normal life. He moved to Wales, and 3 years after his release got married at the age of 52, and the following year became a father. Several years later, in 2005, Barry and his new family moved back to the Birmingham area. However, tensions started to escalate between Barry and his new neighbours. From 2007, Barry started to call the police about his neighbours, the Smith family, with escalating complaints about them. As time went on, Barry became increasingly obsessed with his neighbours, and his behaviour became more and more erratic. The Smiths' life became a misery. Barry was behaving in a threatening way, at one point telling Mr. Smith, "You don't know who I am," whilst holding a pellet gun. He also told Mrs. Smith that he always got people back worse than what they had done to him. Golf balls were thrown onto their conservatory. Barry drilled into walls late at night so he could bang metal rods against the neighbours' walls, and relations between the two households deteriorated still further. Eventually, having had enough of Barry's behaviour, the Smith family moved house. However, their relief was short-lived as Barry turned up at their new home, snarling that he had found them and knew where they lived. The police became increasingly involved in what they at that point believed was a normal neighbour dispute. A police officer, acting on instinct, completed some more detailed inquiry about Barry's, who was now living as Harry Street's, background. The police officer's instinct proved to be correct, and it soon came to light that the man known to them as Harry Street was in fact Barry Williams. On October the 15th, 2013, Barry was arrested at his home in Hazelville Road, Birmingham. Police conducted a search at his home, and in a room which his wife and daughter were forbidden from entering, found a homemade bomb, several homemade bullets, along with 3 different guns. In order to make the area safe, it was necessary to call in army bomb disposal experts. The following year, in 2014, Barry was due to stand trial on the charges of making an improvised explosive device, possession of 3 firearms with intent to endanger life, and putting a neighbour in fear of violence. He pleaded guilty to the possession of the explosive device, whilst the Crown accepted his not guilty plea on the other charges. Once again, he was ordered to be detained indefinitely and sent to Ashworth High Security Psychiatric Hospital. The judge went on to liken Barry's behaviour to that leading up to the events in 1978, and noted that a similar tragedy had been only narrowly averted. After the trial, procedures between agencies were subject to review and change, as West Midlands Police had no trace of Harry Street or his past life on their systems, despite this information being held elsewhere. On Christmas Eve 2014, Barry Williams had a heart attack and died in Ashworth High Security Hospital at the age of 70. Mr. Smith, who had been the neighbour subjected to Barry's anger for the previous 7 years, was the one who contacted Jill Burkitt to let her know that Barry had died. He could no longer harm anyone else. That concludes the story about Barry Williams. You may have noticed that midweek there was a live video, and that was to reveal the winner of the competition of winning the script. The winner was Melissa Kania. She's on the east coast of America. Congratulations on winning, Melissa. Fantastic news. I've got your email and I will be sending you the script. Thank you. Thanks to everyone else that took part. As for the broadcast, they always say don't work with children and animals, and I think I'm going to add technology as well, because my super duper amazing whiz bang fast broadband actually let me down, and I'm shaking my head in disbelief that this happened, but it did. So that's why when I did the second live video, I was just trying to get through it as quick as I could, and hope you understand that that's why it was fairly short. There's a possibility I may do this again. As always, any comments down below I'll always read and try and comment back to you if I can. Thank you once again for all your continuing support. I do appreciate it. It's very kind of you, and I look forward to carrying on with this channel. Thank you once again for listening to the Crime Reel. Goodbye. Psst. In last week's story, one of the victims had a name that is also really well known by a famous celebrity. I was just wondering, have you got any stories about anyone you know that may have a famous name but isn't actually the celebrity? Be interested in reading them. Just add them to your comments. Thank you. Thanks once again for listening to the Crime Reel. Goodbye.